Okay, so Matt, where are we now?
Well, Steve, we've been mashing for about 45 minutes. We've kept the temperature between 150 and 155 degrees, and really, that's the hardest part of this process. Like, keeping that temperature between 150 and 155 degrees takes the most work. After this, we're smooth sailing. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to just pull that bag out, and we are going to put this strainer underneath real quick and drop that in, and we're going to sparge. Okay. So basically what we've got here is I've got another kettle of water that I've gotten up to a boil. Okay. A little less than a boil, but you know, over 160 degrees. Sure. We're going to pour that in, and that's going to stop the enzyme process. Okay, and if you're curious, it's not wise to try and squeeze anything out of the bag. It's still fairly hot, so just let the water do the work. And we're just gonna, we're just gonna use this water to kind of push the rest of the goodness out of these grains and into our wort. Okay, so right now we've done with our mash. We took our grains out. We just have our wort now. And we're just going to bring this up to a boil. Now, another thing that you wouldn't have done if you've only done extract brews is that we need to boil this for an hour so we can add our hops. Okay. But the first thing we're going to do now is, as it's coming to a boil, we're going to go ahead and add our sugar. We're going to add the rest of our sugar. And this is just dry malt extract. And Steve's going to go ahead and pour it in. And I'm going to stir very vigorously as he does, because this stuff clumps up. We don't want it to clump up, and we don't want it to rest on the bottom, because the bottom, it will burn on the bottom. So I'm just going to keep stirring while he keeps pouring this in. And keep in mind, your recipe may call for syrup. This one calls for dry malts. Same principle. You're just pouring the syrup in there to act as sugar. That's going to become the fermentable sugars and alcohol in the end. All right, so we've got ourselves up to just about a full rolling boil, and it's time to add the hops. Sure enough. Now there's basically three periods where you're going to add the hops. You're going to do it for bittering, flavor, and aroma. Right now we're going to add our bittering hops. And this is going to be a 60-minute boil, so the timer starts at 60, and then with maybe 15 minutes left in the boil, we'll go the flavoring hops, and then possibly with just a couple minutes to go, you would add a third addition or an aroma characteristic. And again, always follow the recipe. The recipe will tell you when to add the hops and how much to add. So I'm going to put them into this. We're going to put them into this little bag. And it's just basically the same kind of bag as the grain bag, except for it just lets them float around in there, and we'll just keep that out like this. And we'll push those down. And when we get to 15 minutes left in our boil, we will add our flavoring hops. Okay, well, we've got about 15 minutes left in our boil, so it's time to add our flavor hops. And we're going to put them back in the same bag and go ahead and dump those in. Oops. Try and get them in the bag. And it does okay if we have some hops floating around in the wort, because we're going to filter it out anyway. This is a secondary precaution. So we just added our flavor hops, and with about 15 minutes left in the boil, it's time to add some Irish moss. Now, Irish moss is it's a clarifying agent. It's going to help to bring all of the things that are floating around in our beer. It's going to drag it to the bottom so that our beer will be clearer. It's an optional ingredient. You don't use it in every beer, right? But it's so inexpensive, why not? Your beer will look better. I'm only putting a quarter teaspoon in for a 5-gallon batch. So yeah, it's always a pretty good way to go if you want to clear a beer. Alright, now one more time we're down to about 5 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and add our aroma hops. Those are going to go in the same bag again, and it's going to go for about 5 minutes. Okay, so we finished our boil now, and now we really need to cool this wort off. So what we're going to do is take it and put it into an ice bath that we've created. Okay. So now our wort is in the ice bath and it's cooling down. Now, as it cools down, it's very important that we don't let anything get in here, because once you get to a temperature of below about 150, 160, you run the risk of airborne infections, things you can't even see, getting into your beer. And it's a rather tempting target now, because this is sweet water that an infection would love to get a start on the fermentation process. And nothing that we don't put in is going to wind up improving our beer. Absolutely, so, yeah. When this cools to a certain point, we'll go ahead and cover it, let it cool some more. We don't want any ice to fall into it. We don't want any water to get into it. We basically want to get this down in its 2-gallon version here, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 120, 110 degrees. Sure. Because at that temperature, cold water that we mix
say cold water from the fridge that mixes and goes into our fermenter, winds up balancing everything at a nice cool temperature below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's an ideal temperature to start our fermentation process.
Okay, so we're ready. We're going to just strain this through our 2 strainers and our funnel and get it into our carboy. Now we're just going to go ahead and add in our sanitized bottles of water. So we've got all of our wort in here now. We haven't put our yeast in yet, but what we need to do before we put our yeast in is we need to aerate the wort.
Okay.
We need to add oxygen to this wort. Now there's a few different methods of doing this. I know they sell stones that will add bubbles into it, and I've seen people have wands of oxygen. I just prefer to really shake the snot out of it.
Couple minutes of shaking and it's completely aerated.
Shake that thing, miss. Can I shake that thing, miss? Annabella, shake that thing, yeah. Donna, Jody and Rebecca.
Okay, and now we've aerated our wort, it's time to pitch the yeast. So I'll give this a couple of shakes, break up anything that's sediment at the bottom. And Matthew, if you want to open the lid.
Will do. It's important to know that we let this yeast get to room temperature before we open it.
Okay.
You should hear a little pop. That's how you know that it's probably still alive and working. And that's it. I'm going to put a cork on it right now, and then we're going to get the airlock ready. All right. Well, we're pretty much done here. We've got our beer. It's fermenting away. So we'll go ahead and put the airlock on.
And then we're going to take this into a dark room and let it ferment out at a temperature below 75 degrees because it's an ale. And maybe in 10, 12, 14 days, we'll be ready to bottle.
Sure. You'll see the bubbles coming through, and when the bubbles start to slow down to the point where they've almost completely stopped, you know you're done with your primary fermentation.